Okay, well, it looks like everyone is in from the waiting room, or mostly in from the waiting room. A few people still have their video off, which is fine, but I'll assume you can hear me. So welcome everyone to this meeting of Carpinteria Birdwatchers for September. Is it September already? September 15th, 2022. Tonight's meeting will be on terns, which we have never covered before, so that's exciting. And just a few quick announcements before we get started. This Saturday, we will be having a special outing to the restricted portion of the Carpinteria Salt Marsh Reserve. So there's a couple of things you need to know if you're planning on attending that, which is great if you are, it's open to everyone. But if you do want to attend it, you need to sign up in advance. So we have a list of participants, and there's a post at carpbirdwatchers.org that gives you a link to the sign up form. And you also need to use a second link that's in that same page talking about the trip, where you fill out a waiver. So this is a form that's used by the University of California for access to the reserve. You need to sign the waiver to say you can read what it says, but it's sort of a standard kind of waiver. And if you fill out both those forms, then you're good to go. We'll be starting at 8 a.m. And again, it's important to realize that this is a different location at the marsh. This isn't the place where we've met before for visits to the marsh off Ash Avenue, down near the beach in Carpinteria. This is off Estero Way, which is off Carpinteria Avenue, kind of a little bit to the west, because again, we're going into that part of the marsh that the public doesn't normally have access to. There is a map at that page on carpbirdwatchers.org, so go check that out, and I encourage you to come. It should be a lot of fun. So let's see. And
I have a question about it.
Yeah.
I think I filled out both forms. Is there any way of getting some feedback to find out if I did or not?
You know what? I will check after the meeting, and I will make sure that I see you there. This is Deidre who's saying this. Is that right?
Yes.
So, okay. So yeah, I'll check after the meeting, and I will email you to tell you yes or no.
Thank you.
Okay. And I guess yeah, you're welcome. And one other thing I should mention as an announcement, my internet is down. So I'm doing the meeting using my phone's data connection for my internet. So I don't know if this is going to work particularly well. So if it seems choppier than usual, we're just going to have to roll with it and do the best we can. But I apologize in advance if the streaming quality is not as good as it has been in the past. And then there's one other announcement. Oh, this is very fun. And I'm glad that Deidre and some of the other snowy plover docents are here, because this relates to the Carpinteria snowy plovers from this past summer. So Suzanne Meyer, who is also here, hello, Suzanne, let us know, she's a docent for the Coal Point snowy plover program, that in the recent release of the birds that they had raised at the Santa Barbara Zoo this summer, was a bird that was banded, and when she photographed it and inquired about the band, she was told, oh, this is a chick that came off the beach at Carpinteria. So a little bit of investigating, and I believe what has happened here is there was that one fairly young plover banded PYRR, this young female, a year-old, who kept making nests in multiple locations, and took her a number of tries before she actually got a nest that made it through to hatching. And one was destroyed by wind, one was destroyed by waves. It was quite the saga. But at one point, she laid an egg kind of towards the back of the beach, up near the campground, kind of right as you walk down the little passageway between the two roped off areas. And she laid a single egg there. They put a wire exclosure over it, but she apparently never returned to it. She never laid a second egg. She never incubated. So after a day or so, the plover biologist down there took the egg and transported it up to the plover rearing program at the Santa Barbara Zoo that operates as part of the endangered species recovery effort. And that egg hatched, and that chick was raised and released. And Suzanne got photos of it when the bird was released, and then she got another photo of it about a week or so later, I think. Is that right, Suzanne?
Unmuted.
So,
Yes. I forgot the date now. It was at least a week later.
yeah, so I put an update on carpbirdwatchers.org to mention this, and I included your photos there. I hope that was okay.
Sure.
So you can go there and you can check out that bird and see its band combination, and maybe that bird will show up again in Carpinteria. That would be really exciting. So that means that we basically, our score for this summer was 3 chicks successfully reared out of nests that were, at Carpinteria State Beach. That ties our record from last year. So that's exciting. There was certainly more nesting attempts. There were many as 9 separate nesting attempts. I think 5 nests that actually got as far as hatching. We had some bad luck in terms of predators, especially later in the season. So a lot of those eggs that hatched later on didn't make it to fledging. But still, I think it's a positive trend, and I've got my fingers crossed for next year that we'll have more snowy plovers nesting there. So with that said, that's all the announcements I had. Does anyone have any exciting bird watching they've been doing in the last month that they want to share? We can do a brief sharing session before we launch into Terns. I like your background, Brody. Do you know what kind of tern that is, Brody?
I believe it's an Arctic tern, right?
I'll take your word for it. Arctic tern is one of the more challenging ones. I initially had Arctic tern on the list of terns we were going to talk about tonight, and then I took it off because I don't, I'm not that expert at terns. I'm still learning my terns. Arctic tern is one of the harder ones to see in Santa Barbara County.
Yeah.
We tend to see them on the trips where they go offshore. So I didn't want to try and, offer expertise on distinguishing Arctic tern. I do talk about a couple of other terns, the Forster's tern and the common tern, that are very similar to Arctic tern, that you have a better chance of seeing on shore.
I saw something pretty cool the other day. I saw a nighthawk. I thought that was really fun.
Wow.
Where did you see that?
Over at an avocado orchard.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the time of year when the first year birds are kind of moving around, and you can see them in some unusual places where you don't usually see them. So that's really neat. Yeah, there was one that was up at Lake Los Carneros for a few days. People were seeing one there, and that's really great.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I see someone's waving, and I don't have your name on screen. Go ahead and
Hi.
Christine. Yeah, Chris.
Yeah.
Hi,
Hi, it's Chris. I first want to say thank you for hosting this, and Doug, my husband, is going to join, and yet we're going to be off camera because I didn't plan my day well enough to be on camera. We have to eat dinner. What can I say? But I didn't want to miss this. But I do, because the invitation was open. I want to share that we were up at Big Sur at Point Lobos State Reserve mid-August, I think. And yeah, it was. Anyway, we lucked out and we saw an experience what the docents called the Hotel California for some species or subspecies of brown pelicans. And I don't, if you're familiar, anyone on the screen with Point Lobos State Reserve, there's a particular grove there called the Sherman something Cypress Grove. It's just outstandingly gorgeous, and it's very small. And there were thousands of pelicans everywhere in that cove, on the rocks, in the cypress trees, in the pine trees, etc., flying, landing, preening, doing what someone told me was sort of imitative pre-mating behavior, practicing stuff. And it was amazing. I've never, ever seen anything. I mean, I've seen bird rookeries in the Galapagos and here on Anacapa. And it was the same deal, except without babies. It was amazing. And they said it was a stopover from a northern migration. So they'd seen it happen 1 or 2 times before. But some of the docents weren't even aware of it because they hadn't walked in, that path of the grove for a day or 2, whatever. So it was rare, and it was absolutely spectacular, just spectacular. And they were pretty small in terms of, I think, comparing them to a lot of maybe they were, I don't know if they were juveniles or not, but they didn't seem gigantically enormous. More like, just smaller, whatever, but just thousands and thousands. It was thrilling. So thanks for letting me share.
Chris,
Oh,
how
yeah,
long
no,
were
thank you for
they
sharing.
there?
Say that again.
How long were they there for?
I don't know. I was there for 2 days. And I know that a docent was aware of them the day before. So I know they were there for 3 days. I think I remember hearing that it could have been that maybe there were, a week they'd be there, or maybe even longer, maybe a couple weeks. Not sure. Can't remember. Yeah.
Well, again, that's super exciting. I'm actually going to talk about sort of a similar spectacle with lots and lots of elegant terns that we've been seeing locally in a few different places. So that's a good segue.
Good.
So I'm going to go ahead then and jump on. Oh, Tom, you had your hand.
Oh, Deirdre does too. No, Deirdre, did you have something? Okay. Okay. Where Lowell and I stayed in New Hampshire, I was on a lake, and it happened to be a resident eagle right where we stayed. And we get to watch him eat often. And he or her was so gentle. He'd go up to the water and he would never dive in. He'd just pick the fish out of the water and then fly away. It was amazing. And we saw that, quite a few times while we're from our house, which was pretty cool. Anyways, I just wanted to talk about an eagle.
Eagles are always worth talking about. Yeah, definitely. Okay, well then I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and see if I can get you some terns to look at. Okay, so if I've done this successfully, you are seeing my tern presentation. Someone give me a thumbs up if you're seeing a couple of terns on the screen. All right, excellent. Okay, so we're going to talk about terns. And, as I often say, this is not a super in-depth discussion of tern biology and ecology. We're mostly going to talk about identifying the more common terns that you will see in Santa Barbara County, or that you might see if you're lucky. And, a few fun facts about terns along the way, but it's not there won't be, I was going to say there won't be a test, but actually I have put a quiz at the end. So I know quizzes are fun. So there's going to be some assorted tern photos at the end. So pay attention during the ID discussion. And when you get to the quiz at the end, you can put that to practice. But terns, in my mind, at least as a, beginning bird watcher, I sort of thought of them as very similar to gulls. They are in fact related to gulls. And they have sort of a similar kind of body plan. They're sort of white on the bottom and gray on the top, and they live around the water. But they have their own special something. I think of terns as sort of like gulls with racing stripes. They're very streamlined, and they got the pointed beaks and the pointed wings, and they're just very very angular and fast looking. So I've always enjoyed terns. They can be a little challenging to identify in the sense that they do vary their appearance as they age. It's kind of like gulls do, not as much as gulls do, but a certain amount. They do change as they mature. And then during the year, a lot of the things, they're more easily identified during their breeding season, because they get sort of characteristic bill colors and kind of characteristic black on the head and things like that can be helpful. And then in the non-breeding season, it gets a little trickier. They kind of become more like each other, like other species. So it's definitely a bird that can be tricky to identify. And I would give the same advice I give with gulls. Take your time identifying terns. Don't just grab on one feature and say, oh, it's this. Like, take the time to kind of go through several different characteristics and see if they line up, and that can make life easier for you. Anyway, we'll see lots of examples of that, but let's go ahead and talk about terns. Actually, I wanted to share this video. So this is a video I shot at Santa Barbara Harbor a couple of weeks ago, and there has been a big flock of elegant terns that have been hanging around in the area, and they find a place to roost at night. Sometimes they've been roosting at the mouth of the Carpinteria Salt Marsh. There's been a big group of them that roosted down at La Conchita. Mario, who's in the meeting, was telling me about seeing a big group of them there. And a big group has been roosting up on the sand spit at Santa Barbara Harbor. So I had gone there before sunrise to see them. And let's see if I can, let's see if you can see them. So again, my phone's data may be challenged here. So there's going to be some buffering involved. There's the turn clock. And this is towards the end after the sun came up, and the Terns had basically moved on. You know, most of them had left at that point. But it was very cool, and I just, you know, it was a really neat experience seeing all that. Okay, but let me go back to the slides. Okay, so this is your eBird histogram for Santa Barbara County. So this shows you throughout the year how likely you are to have terns show up in your eBird checklists, and for all the different species of terns that we get. There's a few other species not listed here that are rarer than these, but I figured this was a good group. These 8 species are a good group to get under your belt. And then if you see some tern that's not on the list, you'll at least know it's not one of these because you'll have learned these. And as you can see, some of them are seasonal, like the least tern. You know, it shows up here during the breeding time, and then it's pretty much gone. And in fact, at this point, you'd be very fortunate to see a least tern the rest of this year. They pretty much moved on. Black tern is a rarity that, you know, only sometimes shows up, and I don't think I've heard of one being seen recently. But this would be a time of year when one might occur. So if you watch your eBird alerts, you might get a chance to see them. And I've arranged these from smallest to largest, by the way. So terns kind of come in, I think of them in 3 different sizes. They're small, medium, and large. And if you can figure out, you know, which size bucket you're looking at, it can help narrow things down for you. So least terns and black terns are both pretty small, least tern especially so. Then we've got some medium-sized terns, the Forsters and the common tern. And unlike the name would make you think, the common tern is actually much less common in Santa Barbara County. You know, it's rare for us to see one of those, but they do show up, especially in the fall. This is a good time of year, and there've been a few sightings of them. So if you see that report and you rush out there, you can look for one of those. But if you see a medium-sized tern through most of the year in Santa Barbara, it's going to be a Forster's tern. They're kind of, you know, they're not real big, they're not real small, they're kind of in the middle. And we'll see other things about them that will help you recognize them. Oops. Then we get into our big terns, or what I think of as the big terns. So the smallest of our big terns is the elegant tern. That's the one that was in that big flock I was filming down at Santa Barbara Harbor before sunrise. Then the royal tern is here pretty much throughout the year. The elegant tern is more of a summertime kind of tern, and their numbers are going to wind down over the next few months and not so much in the winter. But the royal terns will be here throughout the year. Caspian tern kind of reverses that, more of them in the summer, but they're still here throughout the year. Not in big numbers, but you'll see individual Caspian terns or maybe a parent and an offspring kind of flying along. And they are especially big. They're the largest of the true terns that we see around here. And then I threw in the black skimmer just because they're so much fun. They're related to terns. They're not super closely related to terns, but they're next to them in the field guide. So I threw them in there so we could look at some black skimmers because they're sort of tern-like and they're a unique bird that's really interesting. So those are your terns that we are going to talk about. So we'll start and we'll go through each of those now in order. And apologies in advance. Some of these are not great photos because these are just my best photo of these species, and I don't have a lot of great photos of some of these species. But this is an adult least tern. And you can see this bird is actually banded. Least terns are endangered, and there's a whole recovery effort, kind of similar to what we have for the snowy plovers. And in fact, least terns and snowy plovers nest in the same habitat, and they face a lot of the same pressures. So if you see a banded tern, And it's very small. Chances are excellent it's a least tern because they are banded a lot of time as part of the recovery effort. Let's go ahead and link out to eBird to see some better photos of what a least tern looks like. So here they are, and this is their breeding plumage when they're pretty distinctive. They've got that sort of white patch on the forehead, this kind of interesting black bridle. They've got this two-toned beak. It's like yellow with a black tip. And again, they're super small. When you see them, even if you don't have a yardstick next to them, you can just tell by the way they're flying, their flight characteristics. They're tiny little birds. I mean, they're small for a tern. Again, a breeding adult. And here's their non-breeding appearance. So as you can see, not as distinctive, and as we see other terns, this is more of sort of the standard non-breeding tern look. But look for things like the beak shape is very important in terns. The details of where it's black and white on the head are very important in terns. And again, it's just super small. So if you can get some other bird next to it of a known size, that will help give you a yardstick. Another breeding adult. This kind of illustrates an interesting thing about terns. With gulls, as their wing feathers age, they tend to fade. So when you see a gull that hasn't molted in a long time, it's got really old feathers, they'll look lighter in shade than they are when they're fresh. Terns kind of do the opposite. Like they have the base color of the feather is actually quite dark, even black, but then it has this lighter covering on it that wears away over time. So when you see the primary feathers, these outer wing feathers of a tern, you see how it has these very black outer primaries and then these lighter inner primaries. This reflects molt. Like these are newer feathers, these inner primaries, and this is an older pair of feathers at the outer end. That looks like the P9 and P10 primaries are older. So it's sort of an interesting fun fact. If you see terns, sometimes they have a lot of black on their wings. Sometimes they have very little. And it's not necessarily a good characteristic to go by in terms of identification, although in some of the trickier ones, it can help if you know kind of what their molt status is, but we're not going to get into that because I don't understand it well enough to talk to you about it. But if you can read up on it in your field guide. So here is a young least tern. And like a lot of terns, if you see some sort of brownish, something other than that sort of black and white and gray pattern, that's a good sign that you're looking at a young bird. And juvenile plumage, so a very young least tern. See, it has a lot of these fresh feathers. Okay, well, I'm going to go back and continue looking at more terns. And then black tern. So this is that rarity that I talked about. And this is probably one of the worst photos I'm going to show you because I've only seen a black tern a few times. They're small, a little bit bigger than a least tern, and not very pointy. They don't really have that really angular tern look. They almost look more like a gull, with their basic shape. And unlike other terns, they eat a wider variety of foods and they live inland more. So most terns are strictly fish eaters. They will eat little fish. That's what they do. And again, this is a thing that distinguishes them from gulls. Gulls eat whatever they can get. They'll eat your Doritos, but terns focus on fish, and they will dive into the water and catch fish, or they'll fly along right above the water and pluck fish out of the water. But the black tern actually eats insects as well. So they will catch insects and eat them. I'll go ahead and just kind of show you its range map so you get an idea, the sort of very cool animated range map at eBird. Because I just, think it's cool to kind of show you where they are and where they come from. If my phone data connection can manage. All right, we'll zoom in here. So this is them wintering down in Central America. And then if we animate, you can kind of see where they go. So mostly they're going up through the middle of the country, and they breed in the northern Great Plains, and then they're back down to Central America. It's a little bit of occurrence out here on the West Coast. Not a lot. but they do occasionally show up. When you see that eBird alert, you have to get out there in a hurry to see them because they don't stick around long in Santa Barbara. Now we'll go on to the next turn. So Forster's tern. Now we're up into the medium-sized terns. And I think, in some sense, these are the most challenging, at least for me, to identify. They're about, I'm not sure if you can see, but I would say they're about yay long when they're standing on the sand. And, like gulls, they will roost on the sand and often in a mixed flock with other species. So you get good comparisons and kind of see, oh, this one's a little smaller, this one's a little bigger. It can be very helpful. Forster's terns, in their non-breeding plumage, they tend to get this sort of black ear patch. Like when the adults are in their winter, well, let's just go look at good pictures of Forster's terns. So rather than me describing it, you can just see. Okay, so here is a breeding adult Forster's tern. Very long tail, the long forked tail. Again, I think is, well, actually, another breeding adult isn't identified as such, but I think that's what it is. And here's the non-breeding look. And this is, a look that you will see around here a lot outside of this is what is it, but in October, this photo was taken. But this sort of black ear patch with white otherwise is a really good indication. You should be thinking Forster's tern when you see that. A beak that's mostly dark or black, and compared to the other sort of medium-sized tern that I'm going to show you in a second, the common tern, it's a relatively big, heavy beak. So when we look at the common tern, look at the beak, and you'll notice it's a little thinner, a little less massive than this Forster's tern beak. There's a young Forster's tern, again, with little flecks of brown on it. Okay. That is Forster's tern, and that is the expected medium-sized tern around here. So if you see, a tern that's smaller than the elegants and royals, we're going to be looking at it in just a minute, but bigger than the least tern, you should start off thinking, okay, probably a Forster's tern, but worth looking at closely to see if it is that. So here is the common tern. So again, a medium-sized tern. A few things to look for, though. This beak is a little narrower, a little less heavy. I think this is an immature bird, probably. Again, I'm not expert on my common terns. But one other thing to look for is this dark carpal bar. So basically what you're seeing in this part of the folded wing is if the wing were outstretched, this would be the leading edge of the inner part of the wing, the part next to the body. And the common tern in a lot of plumages has this dark carpal bar there that the Forster's tern does not have. So that's something to look for when you see this medium-sized tern. Look for that dark carpal bar, and if you see it, it's a good sign you could be looking at a common tern. And so moving up the scale, this is our elegant tern. This is the one that I estimated I saw 800 of them down at the harbor. Mario was saying they saw a couple thousand of them at La Conchita recently. Just really big flocks and just quite a spectacle of nature. So it's bigger than the Forster's tern and the common tern. You can see it helpfully has some Heermann's gulls in the frame here, so you can kind of get a sense of relative size. So it's a little smaller than a gull, right? But noticeably bigger than those Forster's terns. The beak structure is really important on these elegant terns because the royal tern that we're going to see in just a second is very similar, a little bit bigger, but pretty similar in size, and it's easy to mistake the two of them. But the elegant tern has a slightly thinner beak, and it kind of is a helpful mnemonic device. It's named elegant. Its wings are longer and thinner. Its beak is longer and thinner. It's more elegant in that sense than the royal tern. Another characteristic in its non-breeding plumage, so this is non-breeding, this is a photo taken in November, the extent of the white on the forehead and where precisely it transitions into the black on the rear part of the cap is a really important clue for distinguishing between elegant and royal terns. And at first, it was kind of hard for me to really distinguish between them. And then this is a silly thing, but it worked for me. I started thinking of it in terms of like male pattern baldness and a receding hairline. And I guess, if I think of it as a human, I'm used to assessing the precise location of that hairline much more specifically than I am when I'm looking at birds. So in the case of the elegant tern, the transition from the white forehead to the black on the back of the crown is right above the eyes. It's sort of in this area. The white doesn't really, it's sort of gray, like it's already starting to turn darker. Once the back of it is big and shaggy. So again, with that sort of male pattern baldness thing in my head, the elegant tern has somewhat more hair than the royal tern. The royal is more like the king who's aging and is losing his hair. I don't know, because it's royal. That's how I remember these things. Anyway, elegant terns are actually under threat. They only have a few breeding locations. So we see, hundreds and hundreds of them at the right time of year here, but they really only have a few places that they breed. And because I want to, get through this and get to the fun quiz, I'm not going to go into detail, but you can go on eBird and you can look at the distribution map, and they just have a few isolated places in, Southern California and down into Mexico, the west coast of Mexico, where they breed. And they have these big colonies, but only a few of them. So it's important that they, be undisturbed there and be able to breed successfully. And then after they have these big colonial nest sites, they disperse, and that's where we get these big flocks of them showing up at places like Carpinteria. And they roost collectively, and they all fly off together in the morning, and they go fish various places, and they come back and roost in thousands, and it's quite exciting to see. That's your elegant tern. And so these are some photos. That same morning that I took that video before sunrise at Santa Barbara Harbor, these two elegant terns were flying around together way up high, like way above where all the other terns were. And I just thought it was really cool. So I took these photos of them and then read up on it. It is in fact a courtship behavior that they do, that a pair of them, a mated pair, will do. They fly around together up high and I thought it was cool. So I've seen that again since then, now that I know to look for it. So when you're looking at your big elegant tern flocks, see if there's any pairs of them kind of swooping around together up high. Okay, so now we move on to the royal tern. It is another big tern. It's a little bigger than the elegant tern. And again, if they're standing together on the beach, that's super helpful. And they will roost together. Like terns, when they get up and fly around to fish and stuff, they tend to be, on their own or in a flock of their own species. But when they roost on the beach, they'll mix together, and you'll see them side by side with other tern species. And that can be very, very useful. So that beak is just a little bit heavier, a little bit thicker top to bottom than the elegant tern beak. It's a little less long and thin. It's a little less droopy than the elegant tern beak. There's a little bit of a swelling right about here in the middle of the gonus, the swelling in the lower part of the beak. And in the royal tern, it's about halfway back on the beak if you're close enough to see it. The elegant tern, it's closer to the base of the beak. So that can be a useful thing to look for. Again, the extent of the white on the forehead. So this is the royal tern who is going bald. He's further along, right? So it could be a female too, but whatever sex this is, the white comes further back on the crown, and there's less of a shaggy black thing going on, kind of trailing down onto the hind part of the crown. So more of a narrow fringe along the back of the head of black on the non-breeding royal tern. So an elegant and royal tern, when they're in breeding plumage, the black comes all the way forward to the beak. So you can't use that then, but in the non-breeding times, you can take advantage of that. And now we're up to our biggest tern. This is the Caspian tern. And really it's described as gull-like. And when you see it flying around, just the flight characteristics, it seems almost like a gull. For a tern, it's relatively big, relatively heavy. This very thick beak with a dusky, it's very dark red with a dusky tip. That if you get a look at that, it's helpful if it's close to you. You can see it in binoculars, or if you get a photo, you can zoom in and see that. But if you see that, that's pretty much a lock that it's a Caspian tern. The other local larger tern species are going to have just a solid orange beak. They're not going to have that two-tone effect with the dusky tip. And then the black skimmer, our last species. So they skim. They do what this one is doing in this photo. And I just think it's a really cool bird. Unlike the other terns that dive for fish, the black skimmer flies along just above the surface of the water and puts their lower part of their beak into the water and slices along like it's unzipping a zipper, and it will detect a fish. And when it does, it clamps that upper mandible, the upper part of the beak down, and it plucks the fish out of the water. And they'll just go back and forth doing that. And there's, you know, some places locally where they hang out. They like the Andre Clark Bird Refuge where I took this photo. You know, they aren't all over, but the places where they are, they're quite distinctive. And when you see them flying around, you'll definitely recognize them. Super graceful flight. You know, in order to fly right above the surface of the water like that, they have this very light wing loading. They have very long wings with a lot of surface area, and they have this very graceful kind of flight that they do. Anyway, I'm a big fan of black skimmers. Oh, and so I have another video. So let me show you this. Let me watch it on YouTube so I can make it bigger. I'm not going to watch this whole thing, but I just wanted to share a little bit of it because you can kind of see them doing their thing, and it's.
This bird is really, really unique in the way that it flies and the way that it forages. You'll see that when it's flying along a shoreline, it's actually dragging its lower bill along the edge of the water. As soon as it hits a fish, it quickly snaps shut and consumes the fish. The other thing you'll notice when the bird's feeding along the shoreline is that its wings, instead of flapping just outward, its wings are tucked back, and that's so that it can skim along the surface of the water and not get hit by waves.
Their numbers have been
Okay, so I'm going to skip that because the video quality is quite low because of my challenged internet connection. But I encourage you to get back to where we were. I encourage you to go check out that video. I linked to it in the description for this video on YouTube and for the meeting page at carpbirdwatchers.org. It's a really cool video. Okay, so that is it for our terns. You've made it through the 8 species. Congratulations. Are we ready for quizzes? Any feedback before we jump into the quiz photos? Any questions? Ready to identify terns? My wife Linda is watching and she has questions, but she doesn't want to jump in.
The most common terns here.
Yeah, no, sorry. I'm not gonna adjust the presentation at this point based on Linda's much valued and appreciated input. Okay, so I guess we'll just jump on then to the quiz photos. Okay, so here is a tern mixed in with some gulls. For bonus points, you can identify the gulls too, but we're really concerned with the tern. So if you were paying close attention, you should be able to hazard a good guess here. Again, the things I encourage you to look for are the beak is often important. Brody, I see you've got your hand up. What do you think this is, Brody?
Caspian tern.
You are exactly right. This is, in fact, a Caspian tern. Any guess on the gulls?
The one that is an adult in the back looks like a California gull. So does the adult kind of more towards the front.
You are an excellent gull identifier, Brody.
I don't have much of a guess.
Yeah, no, that's good. In fact,
Yeah,
I think those are.
I don't have much of a guess. Okay.
Good job. Yep, and again, you know, if you look at the size of that Caspian tern relative to those California gulls, it's almost as big as them. You know, so again, if you see a tern that big around here, you should be thinking Caspian even before you see that characteristic beak. Okay, let's go on to quiz photo 2. We're 1 for 1. Good job. Okay, so here's a couple of terns. I will give you a clue. These are both the same species, or at least I identified them as both the same species. All of these IDs I'm going to give you are just what I thought they were. I could be wrong, but we will treat my my identifications as authoritative for the purposes of this quiz. And you know, you can't really see how big they are, so I will give you a hint, another hint, and tell you these are amongst the medium-sized terns. These are not the big terns. These are a little bit smaller, but not tiny, a little bit bigger. So Suzanne, you have a guess?
I think that's the Fosters with the yellow legs.
I believe you are correct. In fact, I believe they're both Forsters, right? Yeah, they both have that kind of, this one doesn't have the black ear patch fully developed yet, but it seems like it's going there. This is in February, so I don't know, maybe it's a younger bird. I'm bad on terns. I wish I could, someone who is really sharp on their terns would look at this and go, oh yes, this is an adult and this is a, first year bird. And you can see I'm not that good. But they're about the same size and the beak is kind of similar size, right? This is probably a little heavier beak than you'd expect to see on a common tern, which again is the other one we have locally that's about this size. And an Arctic tern, if we had one on shore, which would be rare, but it could happen, it would have tiny little legs, it would have shorter legs and a smaller beak, but we didn't talk about them, so I don't want to confuse you. There will be no Arctic terns in this quiz. Anyway, on we go to the next one. So we're 2 for 2. This is great. Okay, so I've mixed it up. This is a little more challenging. There are 2 species of terns in this photo. So they're not all the same. So again, take a careful look. You want to really, again, focus on, and these are larger terns, right? So I'll give you that hint too. These are, because again, if you were seeing them in person, you would have a better sense of their size. Yes, Brody, I see you have your hand up.
I think that the one that's almost totally cut off in the very back would be a elegant tern, just like the one that is in the very back.
So wow, so you're identifying this one that you can barely see on the left side of the picture?
Yes.
Okay, well, I'm not going to try and identify that one, so I'll just give you that one. Whatever you think that is, sure, that's fine. But of the 3 that you can see more of, what do you think we have here?
I think the one that's closer to the right side of the photo is elegant tern. Then the other 2, I believe, are the royal tern.
Brody, you are too good. Have you been studying your terns?
Nope.
Well, you're doing really well. Yep, that is what I thought these were also. And again, longer, skinnier, droopier beak, shorter, thicker, less droopy beak on the royal terns. Narrow fringe of black at the rear part of the head with the white extending pretty far back on the crown. This is in December, so this is very much their non-breeding plumage, which is helpful. With the elegant tern, the transition from light to black is more above the eyes. And again, more of a shaggy mullet going on the back of the head there. Okay, and smaller. Like when you see them together like this, the elegant tern is noticeably smaller, right? Its legs are a little shorter. It's a little bit closer to the sand. It's just not as bulky. It's a slightly smaller bird. And when they stand right next to each other, that's super helpful. Okay, so on we go. Oh yeah, I remember. Okay, so a bad photo of a tern in flight. So this is a medium-sized tern. This is not one of those larger terns or one of those tiny terns. And I'm trying to make this difficult on you. This was difficult for me, at least. Andy, yes, what do you think?
Didn't you say something like a black tern?
Well, yeah, it is, but a black tern would be even smaller, and a black tern has more of, again, that kind of gull-like profile. It doesn't really have these long pointed wings. And also, so it's not, but that's a good guess. Brody, you got your hand up?
I want to say common tern, but I'm not totally sure.
Well, I believe that is correct. I believe this is a common tern. The things that I'm seeing that help me think that doesn't really have the ear patch going on. I think this is an immature bird, so maybe it wouldn't really have the ear patch of the non-breeding adult. I've got to study my terns more, but it doesn't have that. The beak is a little bit smaller, a little thinner than the Forster's beak, not quite as heavy. It has the dark carpal bar. You can kind of see it here, right? The inner part of the leading edge of the wing is dark. And another characteristic that I did not talk about, but in the tail, and you can see this when they're in flight a lot of times, the outer edge of the tail in the common tern tends to be dark. Tends to have this little darkish outer part, whereas in the Forster's tern, the outer veins of the outermost tail feathers tends to be white. So that's another characteristic that you can look for. I mean, you'd have to have a really good look to pick that out, but in a photo, it's easier, right? Anyway, put all those three together, and I believe this is a common tern. Okay, 2 terns and a gull, where the one tern is kind of facing away, which makes it a little extra challenging. And bonus points for the gull. Take your time. Don't rush this. Okay, is anyone willing to hazard a guess? I can only see a few thumbnails on the screen, by the way. So if you're just raising your hand in the physical world, I may not see you.
Oh,
So feel free to jump in. If I haven't been calling on you, you've been raising your hand, I apologize. So,
I'll give it a try.
okay, Andy, what do you think we have
I
here?
think the one closest is the Caspian.
Okay.
And then I think the tern in the back it looks like a elegant tern,
Okay,
I'm guessing, and the seagull. Oh, wow. I don't know, maybe a Western gull? I don't really know.
okay, so I agree with 2 out of the 3 there. And the only difference is that I think the one in the back is actually a royal tern, but I have an unfair advantage because I took this photo and I labeled it when I posted it to eBird. And I think I had a much better look at this tern in the back at the time I was taking this photo. So I knew it was a royal tern. Like, I think I have another picture where it turns its head to the side and you can see it has that royal tern beak. So I'm giving you full credit on this because I don't think it's fair for me to ding you for that royal tern.
And is that a Western gull?
And yes, I would say that is definitely an adult Western gull. I think it's got like some oil or something on the side of its head or an injury or something. Kind of an unusual look, but yeah, a lot of Western gull features, even though you can't see it in profile. But this is not a gull talk, so we're going to move on. We're not going to get lost in talking about gulls. But that was very good. Good answer. Okay. Again, 2 species of terns here. And this actually shows you a characteristic that I did not talk about on one of these species. That's a really cool characteristic I should have mentioned. Yes, Brody.
I think the 2 that are closer to the left are elegant, and then the one that's closer to the right is the royal tern.
I think you are exactly right. You guys are getting pretty good. So the feature that I didn't mention is that at certain times of the year, the elegant tern gets this really cool kind of faint pinkish wash on their underparts. Right? Wow. The royal tern is always going to just be white underneath. But the elegant terns, they get a little bit of this really delicate pink color, and you can see it just barely in this photo. But yeah, otherwise, all these characteristics, you can't really see the bill of this royal tern because it's pointing right at us. But you can see it's a little bigger, which is helpful. I guess you can kind of see that the bill's kind of straight and not droopy. You can see a little bit of the white going far back on the head. Anyway, again, I have other photos of this group, so I saw that foreground bird better, and I labeled it as royal tern. Okay, you guys are doing really, really well. Okay, here's a really hard photo. This is a really, really bad photo. It's a medium-sized tern. Yes, Brody, what do you think this is?
Common tern.
Okay, and what leads you to think it's a common tern?
I do think that the tail looks a little bit blacker on the edges.
Yeah, kind of does.
But the ear patch kind of contradicts that, being more like I can't remember the name now.
Forsters.
Forsters, yeah.
Yeah.
But
So
Forsters because I changed my. I think it is a Forsters because the fork in the tail seems to go a little bit farther. So I think it is a Forsters.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's a good characteristic to go by, but I think it is a Forsters, or at least I thought at the time it was a Forsters. Looking at it now, I'm like, that's just a bad photo. Who knows what that bird is?
Yeah.
I think it's probably a Forsters. It's kind of one of those things where, sometimes your photo is a very distant photo and you blow it up and it's grainy and you can't see a lot of detail.
Yeah.
It's kind of gray area, we're talking like, 60%, 40%, you know, 6 of one,
Yeah.
half a dozen of the other. It's kind of hard to know. And it's okay, you know, tern species is available to you. You can always just say tern spa in your eBird list if you're not sure. Or royal/elegant is also one of the options in eBird that I have used on many occasions when I felt like, okay, it's a bigger tern. It's not a Caspian. It's probably royal or elegant, but I don't know which one it was. Too far away. I don't know. Anyway, I said this was a Forster's at the time. Okay, so this is kind of tricky because you can't tell unless you really know your kelp bubbles, well, the kelp bulbs, well as a measuring stick. This is a very small tern, which was obvious to me at the time I took this photo. So that's a good hint. Andy, yes, what do you think this is?
I'd say it's the least tern.
I agree. It is in fact a least tern. And the bands are, you know, it doesn't prove it's a least tern that it's banded, but most of the terns I've seen that are banded around here were least terns. A relatively high proportion of least terns are banded versus any other terns with bands that I've seen. I don't think I've ever seen another tern that was banded, but I haven't checked them all. You know, I didn't check those 800 elegant terns at the harbor for bands. Anyway, yes, I believe that is a least tern. That's a young least tern. That's like probably a first year least tern. Okay, here's a tern in flight. And this is a larger tern. But I've taken away one of the possible hints because it's in April when they still have their breeding plumage. So you can't look at the extent of white on the forehead because it doesn't have white on the forehead. Okay, Brody, what do you think
I
it
think
is?
it's the royal tern
Okay, and what leads you to think it's a royal tern?
because I think that the beak structure kind of looks like a royal tern. I guess that's really it, kind of.
Yeah. Well, so at the time, I entered this as an elegant tern. You know, I could see maybe royal tern. To me, that beak is just a little too thin and droopy. But, you know, there's a lot of individual variation. Like when you see a big flock of terns on the beach, go study them, especially if they're standing next to each other and you can use the size as an extra clue. And you'll see that the beaks vary. There are long-beaked individuals and short-beaked individuals. There are droopy-beaked individuals and straighter-beaked individuals. So, you know, to me, that looks like a skinny enough beak. I would have a hard time putting that in the royal camp. But I could see where you would think that. You know, again, terns are hard. Terns can be very hard. All right, on we go. Okay, 2 species in this photo. And it's in October, so they're helpfully in their non-breeding plumage. And they're standing next to each other. All right, Brody, I see you got your hand up, but my wife says I should call on someone new, so I'm making her the bad guy. Someone who's not Brody. Although, Brody, you're doing a great job. Someone else who's willing to be as brave as young Brody, setting the example for us. Surely you can be as brave as our youngest member. Andy, yes, good job.
Well,
Andy. What do you think?
I'd say the one in the middle is a royal tern, and I think I'd say the other 2 are elegants.
I agree, 100%. Yeah, for all the reasons we've already talked about. But yeah, I get a kick out of seeing them standing next to each other on the beach because again, it's normally so hard, but when they're right next to each other, it really helps those differences stand out. Okay, here's a bad photo of a kind of unusual looking tern. I will let you know this one is on the smaller side. Small and unusual. Yes, Brody, we'll come back to Brody. What do you think?
I really want to say black tern, but I'm probably wrong.
No, you're probably right. This is one of the, I think, 2 black terns I have seen in my life. It's actually the same black tern that was in the earlier photo of a black tern during the first part of the talk, because I only have a few photos of black tern. But this was the same bird flying around. It's a young black tern, like in a first year, you know, fall, or when is it? July, so first summer black tern that's kind of wandered off into the wrong place and caused a lot of excitement down at the beach near the Santa Barbara Harbor. I think Joan Lentz was the one who put the word out. There's a black tern down by the beach. So I raced on up there to see this bird. Okay. Larger terns, which you can see. I mean, they're next to the Heermann's gull here, so it gives you a good yardstick. And two different species here. Okay, Brody, what do we have?
I believe it is an elegant tern closest to the left-hand side, and royal tern closer to the right-hand side.
Okay, and for a bonus, what do you think this one entering the frame on the far right is?
I think that one is a royal tern. I could be wrong though.
Well, we could all be wrong, but I agree with you on all points there. And I just really, in this photo, I really like the sort of jaunty look that this elegant tern had. Like, it looked like he was just, strutting down the beach, like very proud of himself or herself. Okay, here's a tern in flight. I wanted to show you this photo because, again, I was talking about that whole wing molt thing. And you can kind of see here the outer primaries. These are really old feathers. Like, you see how they're all frayed and they've got these notches taken out of them. That plus the fact that they're so dark, in tern molt terms, these are really old feathers. And then these inner primaries here, you can see are much lighter in color and they don't have the sawtooth look, they aren't all frayed. Those are new feathers. So it's kind of fun. When you learn to start aging those feathers, you can pick that stuff out while they're flying. But what do we have here? This is a larger tern. And this one's, I would say, kind of tricky. Like, I know what I thought it was, but as I look at this picture now, I'm not 100% sure that I'm right. Okay, Brody, what do we have?
I want to think a royal tern.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I thought it was a royal tern. Again, not quite long and thin enough on the beak for elegant.
Yeah, and it looks like its cap is, or its hairline is receding a little bit more behind its eye.
Yeah, but kind of in the middle, like a lot of times these features, like they look obvious in the field guide. And then when I see the bird out in the world, it's like, that bird is exactly midway between the two examples in the field guide. So which way is it? I don't know. That's why it's good to have more characteristics to look at. Okay, so here's two species in this photo. You've got some breeding plumage terns and another bird that does not have tern in its name. And they're kind of jumbled together, so they're hard to see, but that's the way it is sometimes when you're out birding. Andy, what are they?
Well, that one's a black skimmer with the big, those two with the big beaks, and all the others look like elegants.
I agree. Yeah, that is what we have here is elegant terns and black skimmers.
I just want to add, it looks like, I want to say that it looks like there might be one of the Caspian terns in there.
Really? So where do you see that? Which part of the picture?
See that? I want to say it's right behind the black skimmer. That one right there.
The one on the right?
Yeah.
See, so that beak, you're talking about this bird here?
Yeah.
Yeah, see, I really think that beak is too thin for a Caspian beak. A Caspian beak is a really heavy beak.
Okay.
A really solid beak, top to bottom.
Okay. Thank you.
But in terms of the crown, I mean, the breeding, the black cap, that's like a Caspian look. The Caspian keeps that look later than the elegants and the royals. Like, they all have the full black cap when they're in their breeding plumage, and then the royal and elegant lose it, and the Caspian retains it. Or at least it retains it a lot longer. I'd have to go look at my field guide. I know there's a lot of times when I see a bird like with a full black cap, a big tern with a full black cap at a time of year when I know that the royals and elegants should have that white forehead, and that's a good clue that it could be a Caspian. Okay, here's a solo tern.
How about that one in the far, way back on the right?
You're talking about in the previous picture?
Yeah.
This one way back here?
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, I could see that being a royal tern. You know, at the beach that day when I took this photo, I didn't notice any royal terns, but that doesn't mean there isn't one hiding in the photo. I will acknowledge that that bird does exhibit some royal characteristics. Okay, so now on to this bird. So it's in March, so it's in its breeding plumage, so the cap extent doesn't really help you. But you do have a good look at that beak. This is a larger tern. You can see there's ring-billed gulls, I'll tell you. Like this is a ring-billed gull off to the side. I think these are also ring-billed gulls you can sort of see in the background. That's a good size comparison. So I think by this point, you either know or you're tired of identifying terns and you don't care. So I'll just go ahead and reveal. That is a royal tern. Yeah, Brody, I'm sure you were going to say royal tern. Were you not? Yeah, you're going to say royal tern. It's a royal tern. All right, let's just blow through the rest of these. So this is a good example of something you see a lot with terns, which is a young bird, a juvenile tern, hanging out with its parent. So even though, and these are royal terns, I'll just make this not a quiz. So even though they don't breed right around here, they breed somewhere else, we still see the young hanging out with their parents a lot because terns, it takes them a while to learn how to feed themselves. Like the whole process of like diving into the water and catching a fish is complicated, you know, which I imagine it would be. So the young follow their parents and the parents will continue to feed them fish for quite some time. And so you'll often see this where you've got a young bird next to a parent. And if you look, this young bird, its beak is lighter. And this is typical across a lot of tern species. The young birds, the beaks are more yellowish, less orange, and they're straighter. You know, less like swollen, they're like shorter and straighter. Like the beaks get bigger as they mature, it seems like in a lot of cases. So, and that can throw you off if you see the young bird by itself. But again, these dark flecks on the upper parts are a good indication that this is a young bird. That's a young tern look, not having the sort of undifferentiated gray on the back. And I thought that was cool. Okay, here's a very bad fuzzy photo of a very small tern. It's got that little bridal effect, the sort of white with the black kind of outlining it on the forehead. And again, because, yeah, Brody, what is it? You're muted, Brody, or I didn't hear you at least because of my
I
connection.
think it's a least tern.
Yeah, it's a least tern. A very grainy, distant photo of the least tern. Okay, and you know, again, because I'm getting tired, I'm gonna just move fast. Here's an elegant tern on the left and a royal tern on the right, and I really like that sort of comparison they give you. And the elegant tern on the left, like it is just starting to lose the black on its cap, right? So, and this is in October, so that kind of gives you an idea, you know, the variation you might see around that time of year. Like you could still see a tern with a full black cap, even though it should be getting a white forehead by then. Again, there's individual variation, but standing next to each other, clearly a smaller bird, you know, beak is thinner, droopier, a little bit. I mean, it's subtle, but if you stare at a lot of them, it starts to look more obvious. All right, our final photo. I was very proud of this photo. I was very excited because, you know, my camera's like, you know, burst mode, you know, taking lots of photos. I wanted to get the photo where it's just almost touching the water, and I didn't quite get that. But a split second later, this bird was underwater grabbing a fish. But what do we think it is? It's a relatively large tern. Brody, what is it?
A Caspian tern.
Yeah, it is in fact a Caspian tern. That sort of dusky tip on the beak and the very dark red beak helps you identify what it is. Okay, so that is it for terns. We have made it to the end. Hooray! Congratulations, everybody. Any final, give yourselves a round of applause. This is very impressive. So go out and see some terns now. Come on Saturday if you want. You know, fill out the forms. You know, go to the Carpinteria Birdwatchers website and fill out the 2 forms. And to sign the waiver form, and then show up at 8 o'clock, and we'll go into the marsh. We're going through the locked gate. It's very exciting.
You know, John, I did see, I was out with a friend on about close to sunset the other day, and we saw a flock I said, oh, no, it's only a couple of hundred. She said, no, 1,000. And we started counting and it was close to 1,000 right here, Carpinteria, right here by the creek. Out
And
over the,
yeah, and I would guess those are the elegant terns, because that's the really big tern flock we've had lately around here, and it moves around, and yeah, it's just so impressive. It's like the herds crossing the Serengeti. I feel like I'm watching a wildlife documentary, seeing that a flock of that many birds, and the sound of it is amazing too. Like in the morning at the harbor, that morning, just the sound of all these terns taking flight, just hundreds and hundreds of them all calling at the same time. It's really exciting.
You can talk about what it sound like.
Yeah, I
thank
did
you.
not talk about what terns sound like. So consult your field guide if you have an app that'll play you the sound of terns. Terns tend to sound pretty similar to each other. There are slight differences, and you can learn to pick out certain things. Like the Caspian tern has this really harsh kind of sound, and the royals and elegants have a slightly different pitch. So it's worth studying up on that. Yeah, you're all very welcome. Thank you for participating. I had a lot of fun, and I will see you at the marsh on Saturday, or at the meeting next month, or just out bird watching. This is the time. The fall migration is happening. Go out and chase those rarities. It's a lot of fun right now. Right. So long, everybody.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
guys.
Yeah.